Welcome. I'm Natalie, and this is Scientology Life After a Cult. Welcome, everybody. Today, we are going to get into this story involving Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, who is an author, a former Scientologist, although we're going to get into how he's denied he's a Scientologist in the past. And he is up against some serious allegations, some essay allegations. We're going to look at those. And we're going to take a look at his history in Scientology and his family's involvement. He has deep ties. In fact, we're even going to listen to a recording of Neil Gaiman as a child who was getting auditing on Scientology's Bridge to Total Freedom, and shares his auditing wins as a child. That was a trip to listen to. I'm going to share that with you guys too. Lots to go over. Trigger warning, because this is a topic we're talking about SA, we're talking about multiple allegations of abuse. Just be aware if you got to step away from it. It's got a lot of ick in here. There are details, even though I'm going to be reading an article, I'm not going to go over certain details because honestly, it grosses me out. And I'm like, no, it's triggering for me. So there's parts that I am going to skip over, but I'm going to link down below the articles that I'm referencing so you can go read them fully yourself. But yes, thank you, Jersey Jan. Definite trigger warning here. But like I said, when it comes to the exact details of a few things, I'm going to try and be light on those selfishly because it triggers me. And yes, that's how we're going to do it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Boda29, thank you for becoming a member of the channel. I appreciate that. Hope to see you later today. We're going to do a members only live at 4 Central. But if you can't catch that, I hope you catch it on the replay. All right, are you guys ready? Y'all ready to jump into this? Yeah, Asen, you read the article. It was rough. Indeed. And if you have questions, put question before or comment. I'll try and keep an eye on that as well to answer as we go. But where I kind of wanted to start out here was just going over the allegations, what Neil Gaiman is facing, what is being said. Neil Gaiman allegations, multiple women accuse Sandman author of essay. There are multiple articles out right now about this. Some of them get into very extreme detail. I was actually kind of surprised, but like I said, I'm not going to go into those exact details. But we're going to talk about, why I want to talk about this one, because it's a former Scientologist involved in some serious messed up allegations. But I also find it interesting that in the past, Neil Gaiman has really backed up from that he was ever a Scientologist. And we're going to look at that. In fact, let's do this here. You know what? Let's start with, because I think most of you here are familiar with what the allegations are. Let's just kind of go through this here. Multiple women have accused the Sandman and Coraline author Neil Gaiman of essay in a New York Magazine cover story, speaking on the record about their experiences. Back in July, and remember, this was in July of 2024 when this, I believe, first started to come out. Back in July, Tortoise Media broke the news that Gaiman had been accused of essay by 2 women and released a 6-part podcast, Master, which covered the allegations of 5 women. However, several of the women had used only their first names or pseudonyms to protect their identities, and a major news organization had yet to corroborate the full extent of the reporting until now. And because so much of this, it's interesting that this came out previously. It was starting to come out, but it wasn't really being backed up by any major news organization. More women came forward, and now it is everywhere. Shout out to the mods for being here. Thank you, Jersey Jan and Sandy McKenna. I see you there. So goes on to say, in the New York Magazine piece titled, "There Is No Safe Word," reporter Lila Shapiro spoke to 8 women who had similar experiences with Gaiman, 4 of which also participated in Tortoise's podcast. One of these women, Scarlett Pavlovich, was 22 when she first met Gaiman's ex-wife, Amanda Palmer. I think that Amanda Palmer and Neil Gaiman are still going through a custody battle and divorced. So they met in New Zealand. They struck up a friendship before Palmer asked Pavlovich to help babysit her and Gaiman's 5-year-old child. Pavlovich said that the first time she met Gaiman while waiting for the child to finish a play date, He offered her a bath in a claw tub in his garden. She alleges that he then joined her in the tub naked, asked her to sit on his lap, and essayed her. There's some details I'm not going to get into of actually what happened in the bathtub. I will link this down below. You can read it yourself. Pavlovich, gosh, every time I say it, it's just such a tongue twister. Pavlovich claims this continued for the remainder of the time that she babysat for the family, including an instance where he allegedly attempted, I'm not going to say that, but something. When it was over, he called her slave and ordered her to clean him up, the article reports. She protested that it wasn't hygienic. He said, "Are you defying your master?" she recalls. And she had to lick her own feces. The similarities, there definitely seems to be a theme here with Neil Gaiman and these interactions with the multiple women that have come forward. And it's interesting too how some of them, even Pavlovich herself, there's such a line. I think when you have somebody that carries so much power like that, there's such a power dynamic, and the activities that he was involved in and encouraged and manipulated her into doing it's one thing if you're into, the whole BDSM community, there are rules around it of consent on every single act. I know this because I read up on it. I'm like, how does this work? And it sounds like that was not something that he followed, that he did not follow those rules at all. And it just seems like this was really all about him, what he needed in that moment, no matter who was there, no matter who was around. Representatives for Gaiman told the Tortoise podcast that sexual degradation, bondage, domination, and sadism and masochism may not be everyone's taste, but between consenting adults, BDSM is lawful. Though the New York Magazine article states that all of the accusers had at some point played along by calling him master, as he desired, and continuing to communicate with him, the women allege that consent and specific BDSM activities had not been discussed and agreed upon prior to them happening. At another point, Gaiman was staying with his son at a hotel in Auckland and asked Pavlovich to watch the child as he got a massage. She alleges that he then proceeded to have sex with her while his son was in the room and continued to talk with him during the act. Pavlovich says she asked Gaiman, "What the F are you doing?" and was in a state of shock during the incident. Gaiman has strenuously denied all allegations against him since the Tortoise podcast came out, asserting that all relations were consensual. In a statement in response to Pavlovich's allegations about the hotel room incident, his representatives call it false, not to mention deplorable. Gaiman's reps did not immediately respond to Variety's request for further comment on the New York Magazine piece. There's so many different articles about this right now. I mean, there's just a ton that you could end up actually reading to find out what's going on. However, Pavlovich remained in contact with Gaiman after that point, even reassuring him at one point that their interactions had been consensual. Eventually, she agreed to sign an NDA and was paid, according to New York Magazine, a total of $9,200 in 9 separate payments. In January 2023, she filed a police report accusing him of sexual assault, but the matter has now been closed, a police spokesperson told New York Magazine. Caroline, who opted to be identified just by her first name, also signed an NDA after her experience with Gaiman. She worked as a caretaker and sometimes babysitter on Gaiman's property in Woodstock, New York, and the two began a physical relationship after her husband left her in December of 2017. According to New York Magazine, Carolyn once fell asleep reading stories to the child in Gaiman's bed. When he returned, he got into bed with his son in the middle, then reached across the child to grab Carolyn's hand and put it on his penis. The New York Mag story reads, Carolyn says she jumped out of the bed. He didn't have boundaries, Carolyn told New York Magazine. I remember thinking that there was something really wrong with him. In December 2021, Carolyn claims Gaiman's business manager offered her $5,000 to sign an NDA and move off property. She asked for a much bigger sum, $300,000, to which Gaiman agreed. His representatives told New York Magazine that Carolyn initiated the sexual encounters and denied that he engaged in any sexual activity with her in the presence of his son. Another accuser is Kendra Stout, who was 18 years old when she first met Gaiman at a book signing in Florida. Their relationship turned physical around 3 years later. And in 2007, she alleges he AR'd her during a trip to the Cornish countryside after she repeatedly told him no. Due to having a bad UTI, Stout filed a police report in October, according to New York Magazine. Catherine Kendall, who was 22 when she first met Gaiman in 2012, also spoke out, alleging that Gaiman attempted to assault her in his tour bus after she had told him she didn't want to have sex with him. New York Magazine reports that years later, he gave her $60,000 for therapy to, as he put it in a recorded phone call, to, quote, make up the damage. Now, I want to kind of call that out here. Make up the damage. That is a Scientology phrase. In Scientology, when you get in trouble, you have to do what's called a liability formula. We've talked about this some on the channel. And as part of those steps, one of the steps is make up the damage one has done far beyond the ordinary contributions of a group member. And for me, that goes in the column of like, oh, really? You're not a Scientologist? I don't know. But we're going to blow that out of the water in a little bit. The guy was absolutely a Scientologist. Really a Scientologist, more than anybody actually knows, except the people who knew. As the New York Magazine article states, since Tortoise's bombshell report in July, several of Gaiman's film and TV projects have been affected. Season 3 of Prime Video's Good Omens will now end with one 90-minute episode, with Gaiman not part of the production. Disney paused production on its film adaptation, The Graveyard Book, and Netflix canceled Dead Boy Detectives, though it's unclear if it was related to the allegations. However, The Sandman Season 2 is still expected to release this year on Netflix. In addition to Prime Video's Anansi Boys series adaptation, Prime Video did not comment on the allegations, and Netflix and WBTV did not immediately respond to Variety's request for comment. So, that is what we know, what the allegations are. We know what this is, the whole kind of, you get an idea of what's been happening here. Now let's take a look. I mentioned, if you caught my recap this morning, I talked a little bit about this and how I was friends with and knew Neil Gaiman's wife, Mary. And Mary was a staff member, still could be to this day, I'm not sure, in Twin Cities. When I was still a Scientologist in good standing, Mary was the executive director, was friends with my mom. She had run the operating Thetan committee before she joined staff. So she was a public Scientologist for many years, and she became a staff member as well. As I understand it, so I left Scientology in 2010, and I think they divorced. Like, all of this was going along between Mary Gaiman and Neil Gaiman around like 2007 or so. And Mary obviously was a very active Scientologist. She was a staff member. She was running the operating Thetan committee, which is like PTA for Scientology. And Neil was never around. The whole time I knew Mary, and I was in Scientology here in the Twin Cities, they lived in neighboring Wisconsin. And so the Twin Cities organization, I think they lived close to the border of Minnesota. So it wasn't that far. And the Scientology organization today is located in St. Paul, Minnesota. Mary was very active. And like I said, Neil was never around. He seemed to be, he's what at the time I thought of as somebody who is what's called disaffected in Scientology, which basically means you got one foot out the door. So I do know that when Neil Gaiman and Mary Gaiman were getting a divorce, because I remember this at the time because I knew Mary, they had gone to Florida to do marriage counseling. And I remember being surprised by that because I really didn't think Neil Gaiman was much of a Scientologist anymore. So I don't know if it was something he did to maintain his, being in good standing with Scientology, or because Mary asked him to. I don't know. I was curious at the time as to why he would agree to that if he was no longer a Scientologist. Here's the other thing, and this is kind of a point I want you guys to keep in mind, all right? Marriage counseling in Scientology, you sit down with your partner and you have an auditor across from you, and they ask you, you're both there together and one person is holding the cans, and you're asked questions like, let's see if I can remember, because I did marriage counseling. It was like, so for example, if it was Neil and Mary, it would be, what have you done to Mary? What have you withheld from Mary? And then to Mary, what have you done to David? What have you withheld from David? And you go back and forth depending on who's holding the cans at that moment. But my point is, you get off those overt and withholds, right? The idea is that you unburden yourself of what you did, and you either stay together, and if you're not going to stay together, that you're able to end it more amicably because you're no longer hiding things from each other on what you did to get you to the point where now you're going to be getting this divorce from the perspective of Scientology. So it's got me wondering and questioning, what did Scientology know about what Neil Gaiman, oh my gosh, I'm calling him David. I apologize. David is his father, Neil Gaiman. Neil and Mary Gaiman. Oh my gosh. Oh, gotta love menopause. Brain fog. Neil and Mary Gaiman. So it would have been, Neil, what did you do to Mary? What did you withhold from Mary? And so on and so on. So in doing that, how is it he got through marriage counseling? He wouldn't have gotten through marriage counseling without disclosing some stuff that happened. And Mary already knew that he had cheated on her. And when you look at a lot of the stories coming out, the timeline lines up with this happened throughout their marriage, it sounds like, and throughout his marriage later with Amanda Palmer. He married Amanda Palmer really quick, as I remember it, after his divorce from Mary Gaiman. But again, I want you to remember that. And as you move forward, what did Scientology know? What came up in that marriage counseling that Neil Gaiman might have admitted doing that stayed right there? I don't know. But in the procedure of doing that, those are the kind of things that you would share. You would have to say the things that you did. So I just don't think there's no way that he could have gotten through that without getting into the details of what he actually did. Because when you pick something to share, like, oh, I cheated on her, like, you get the details about it. You get the actual details. So my first question is, what did Scientology know? When did they know it? Because this wasn't, even though Neil Gaiman went and did this marriage counseling at Flag, it doesn't mean that, I don't think that was his way of getting back into Scientology. I don't know why he did it, but he has a longer history in Scientology that he's denied. And you will be hard pressed to find on the internet that backs up how much of a Scientologist he was, but we're going to do it. Hey, Club Brain Fog. That's right. If I say brain fog 3 times, she appears. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Pause for Andrea. Wow. Does that line, manner of questioning, help any marriage? Yeah. I don't know. I did not know. I've never known Scientologists to be big fans of it. James Steele, no wonder they got divorced then. Yeah, exactly. So much is coming out about this. Even I knew back then that he cheated on Mary. What I didn't know was the length, the number of people, and so on. So let's take a look at this now. I want to share something with you. Well, let's see. I'm going to show you. So Neil's former wife, Mary Gaiman, who, as far as I know, is still an active Scientologist today. This is from a video that's not her there. That's another Scientologist. I'm going to show you Mary because she's in this video. This video was done some years ago, but you can see Mary here. Watch this. So that's Mary. This is Mary Gaiman, who was the first wife of Neil Gaiman. And when I left Scientology, she was an executive director.
Hey, Kansas City, I'm the ED Day, and I can't wait till you guys come.
Yo, baby.
Yo, baby, Kansas City.
They're making a video for Kansas City, who is going to come for some fundraiser for their ideal organization. But that's Mary. That's who Mary is. I want to show you, I did come across and find a little article here from Time. And it says Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, author of Coraline, and most recently, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which, by the way, there's a whole story behind the ocean at the end of the lane. The ocean at the end of the lane, I did not read it, but I'm a little familiar with the story. It involves the story of someone who was a boarder at his parents' place who unalived himself. That happened. That was a real thing that happened. That's a whole nother side tangent there. His father was the British spokesperson for the organization, and his sisters and ex-wife are reportedly all members. Yeah, Neil Gaiman's parents weren't just any Scientologists, okay? His father was in the Guardian's office. That was the Office of Special Affairs from back in the day. They weren't just public Scientologists or kind of a little bit involved. No. Very involved. His sister, when I was in the Sea organization, Neil Gaiman's sister, Claire Edwards, was the head. God, I'm so thirsty all of a sudden. And I don't have water because Nancy wasn't here to remind me. Where's your water, Natalie? Okay, I digress. His sister, Claire, ran Scientology Missions International when I was in the Sea Org, which is a very senior position. And yeah, his dad was in the Guardian's office. All right, let's look at this some more. While some speculated that his latest book explores his past in Scientology, Gaiman firmly denies being a Scientologist. Gaiman firmly denies being a Scientologist. In an interview with The Big Issue, Gaiman said, "I think there are about 3 mad people saying that." I guess he thought there's just 3 mad people saying that he was a Scientologist. Only they keep repeating the same things. And then you get other people come in and say, this isn't actually true. And they never really reply, just go elsewhere. Bonkers people. So he just blows it off and actually is like, no. I was not a Scientologist. Dude was totally a Scientologist. And we're going to look at a clip from when he was even a child. Neil Gaiman was not just a Scientologist. He was raised in Scientology from the age of 5. He was given Scientology grade chart on the bridge to total freedom, auditing, not just child stuff, actual grade chart, what's called in Scientology auditing at a very young age. I think he was around 7 or so, and we're going to look at that here. Check this out. This is an interview that he was doing, and they pulled up audio from when he was a child defending Scientology, which he was put up to that by his dad, who was in the Guardian's office. So his job was to make Scientology look good.
We've got a little bit of, I don't know if it'll be a treat for you, Neil, or not, but we've actually found a recording of you at the age of 7, believe it or not. And you do sound like a very, very intelligent 7-year-old. You were interviewed for a BBC radio program, The World at Weekend, because at the time your father worked for the Church of Scientology.
I remember I'd been thrown out. I've been thrown out of school.
Well, this
because my parents were Scientologists.
This is. Have you heard this since this was broadcast?
I haven't.
This is you at the age of 7.
Go for it.
It is an applied philosophy dealing with the study of knowledge. It helps you to handle quite a lot of problems.
But what problems do you have as a little boy that this helps you with?
Only one big problem.
What's that?
My friend Stephen.
Oh, I see. Is he a Scientologist?
Yes.
He is. But I mean, how does this grade that you've got, problems release, help you to deal with Stephen?
Well, you know, I've dealt every single problem except Stephen. It's one thing problems release can't tell me to handle.
So you still fight with Stephen?
It's more of a question he fights with me.
What kind of memories does that bring back?
Actually, what I was amazed by was the accent. Because there is that, mostly because when I was doing the audio recording of Ocean at the End of the Lane, I was having to go to the BBC website and find recordings of Sussex accents. And listening to that, it was like, oh my gosh, I had one. I never knew.
Who was
Just a
Stephen?
little one, but he was the kid at the end of the lane. kid who lived in a house just down the road. And he almost crops up in this book.
Really?
I think it's interesting too that he kind of just really brushes off the fact that, what that had to do with Scientology and who his dad was and why that was done at all seemed to really just be brushed under the rug there and downplayed. And again, his dad was basically OSA back in the day. And Neil Gaiman was put forth as a child who had been getting Scientology auditing to be this example of what Scientology could do for children. He was being held up as that example. And I think it's really telling considering, what's happening with him today. Now, I want to show you a little bit more information about Neil Gaiman's parents. David Gaiman was relatively famous in Britain in the 60s and on into the 70s. And by the way, this is from Mike Rinder's blog. As the head of Scientology's worldwide communications, he was the public face of Scientology in the UK. He often appeared on television, radio. This is Neil Gaiman's dad. We're talking about David. Radio or in the press as their spokesperson in response to negative stories or articles which were increasing along with the cult's presence. He was adept publicly at what appeared to be a calm and reasoned response about Scientology, while privately threatening lawsuits and issuing libel writs against the people and media behind anti-Scientology stories. When Hubbard decided around 1966 that Scientology's best defense against negative stories was to attack the sources rather than the stories, it was David who took up the charge and began planning ways to undermine Scientology's critics, while his colleagues in the more proactive St. Hill Manor's Guardian's office took a swifter and more immediate approach. Hubbard requested they produce stories about murder, assault, destruction, violence, sex, and dishonesty in that order against their enemies. We know Scientology does this to this day. To attack and undermine using any means necessary. Fair game, basically. Fair game, basically. Their most prominent critics, including the National Association of Mental Health, at the time, the NAMH, was the largest mental health charity in the UK and still is today under its new name, MIND or MIND. In the early 60s, this association was one of the most vocal critics of Scientology and the dangers it posed in its practice of attacking and forbidding any and all psychological or psychiatric treatments. Kenneth Robinson, the UK Minister for Health, who had introduced the sanctions against Scientology in 1968, was NAM's vice president until he became minister and he was replaced by Robert Lindsay, Lord Bonnell. Bonnell was the first person to raise concerns about Scientology and its dangerous attitude to mental health, to the new Minister for Health. As early as 66, Hubbard personally instructed staff to get a detective to dig up dirt on Bonnell's past. I mean, that's just like, again, this is what Neil Gaiman's dad was doing. Very deep into Scientology. Very, very, very deep into Scientology. Let's hear. So it goes on. I'm going to link this down below so you guys can read the whole thing. But by late August 1968, everything was going to plan for the Gaimans. 7-year-old Scientologist Neil's interview, that's the one we just listened to, had gone better than his parents could have hoped. The BBC's Keith Graves described him at the end of the interview as extraordinary. David, meanwhile, was progressing ahead with his own plan to destroy the NAMH, while at the same time, both parents were working at St. Hill Manor, which was issuing 40 writs for defamation against the media, their neighbors in East Grinstead, and their local MP, Jeffrey Johnson Smith, who had stated in light of the UK government's banning of Scientology students that Scientologists direct themselves deliberately towards the weak, the unbalanced, the immature, the rootless, and the mentally or emotionally unstable. David had already responded with a statement published in the Observer newspaper on the 25th of August, rebuking Johnson Smith's comments and by extension, the UK government's stance. And what David Gaiman went on to say was, from a personal viewpoint, I am a little bored with the allegation that everyone in Scientology is either neurotic, weak-witted, or naive, especially since the mentally and physically ill are not permitted Scientology training and processing. And then less than a week later, on the 30th of August, their lodger for over 2.5 months, Scientology student Johannes Scheepers unalived himself using their car. So not only were Neil Gaiman's parents very deep in Scientology, his father worked for the Guardian's office, but they also took in boarders. And there was a boarder they took in, a Scientologist who was doing things at St. Hill, who ends up unaliving himself. This then becomes part of the story in the book that Neil Gaiman wrote. What was it? The Ocean at the End of the Road, or something like that. But that's where this is from. Rue says Gaiman's family are still in. He can't say much or else he never gets to see his family again. I don't blame him for skirting around the issue. He didn't skirt around it, though. He outright denied it. And it's not just him growing up in Scientology, because you could argue and go, well, kids cannot consent to becoming a Scientologist. And then when he was an adult or older, he left. No. Neil Gaiman got onto the operating Thetan levels of Scientology. This is something I'm pretty sure he doesn't want people to know. And frankly, Scientology doesn't want people to know. Not at this point. Not with all this going on. I doubt Scientology's claiming him now. Scientology, why don't you come get Neil Gaiman? Take him back. We don't want him. Although we did leave Scientology. So I want to share something with you that was in the Underground Bunker. And it's an article that was written, and it was an interview with Bruce Hines. Bruce Hines, many of you are familiar with him. I think he was on Peeling Back the Onion not that long ago, sharing his story. He has shared his story multiple times. He was an auditor in Scientology. He actually audited a lot of famous people, including, guess who? Neil Gaiman. Mr. I'm not a Scientologist. I was never a Scientologist. What are you talking about? So let's take a look at that, you guys. Now, I'm kind of jumping into this. I'm going to link it down below so you guys can see the whole thing. But this is partway through this article. Then in the early 80s, a person was assigned to me, and this is Bruce Hines speaking, to audit by the name of Neil Gaiman. He was the son of two former high-ranking members of the Guardian's office at St. Hill, England, known as GOWW back in the day. The WW part stands for worldwide, and it was the International Guardian's Office headquarters. The parents were David and Sheila Gaiman. Neil is now a well-known author. I don't remember a lot about why I was auditing him. Was it on the Operating Thetan Drug Rundown, which was later named New OT4? So Operating Thetan Level 4. That's where I got to in Scientology. You don't get onto the upper levels of Scientology without being a very dedicated Scientologist, or at least making it look that way, because they have to allow you onto it. And Neil Gaiman, too, I couldn't find anything when I was looking to back this up, but I remember his wife telling me he was a Sea Org member, too, at one point, that Neil Gaiman was in the Sea Org. And I think that's also part of the history that he wanted to cover up, that he didn't want to come out. And now, of course, I'm sure Scientology doesn't want to now with all of these allegations out about him. Let's see. That is possible. It was only for a few sessions since he had grown up in Scientology. He hadn't taken recreational drugs nor many medications. Some people that rundown can go on for some time. I do recall that he had already done the level of Operating Thetan Level 3. See, again, you guys, you don't get on to Operating Level 3 not being a Scientologist. So when Neil Gaiman was like, no, I was never a Scientologist. I don't know why people say that. It's like, no, yeah, you were. You did the auditing with Xenu. You got rid of your body Thetans. You did that auditing because that's part of it. You can't do Operating Thetan Level 4 without doing the one before. So that is a part of his history that he really seems for years that he's wanted to downplay that connection. And like I said, even when he was still married to Mary, girl was on staff for Scientology very dedicated Scientologist, but he was never anywhere to be seen. So let's see. Where'd we leave off here? Okay, so he's basically saying he hadn't done any recreational drugs or medication growing up, being he grew up in Scientology. So him doing operating Thetan level 4, it would have gone quicker because he didn't do all those drugs. I do recall that he had already done the level of operating Thetan level 3, and so I had to use the techniques for dealing with body Thetans. In retrospect, it's interesting that he made the trip from England all the way to Florida. He was a pleasant person, somewhat reserved, and easy to get along with. The sessions were uneventful. I never heard anything further about him in the Scientology world. When I got out of Scientology, I've enjoyed some of his works. And then the article just goes on to talk about some other experiences with him, I think auditing other Scientologists who are more well-known. So again, I look at this and I go, okay, for a period of time, quite a period of time, Neil Gaiman was indeed a Scientologist, which means he would have undergone security checks. He definitely underwent getting off his overs and withholds when he did the marriage counseling with his wife, Mary. And I ask again, what did Scientology know? Did they know what was happening or what he was doing? Which he then continued to do. And based off of these reports and these allegations, it seemed to get worse and worse. So it seems like this is something that went unchecked for a long time. And I'm just asking, what did Scientology know back then? They're not known for making these things known, or was there any attempt to try to handle him in that way? We heard when he's paid off his victims, alleged victims, that there's money involved, and this idea of I want to make up the damage, which is very much, again, a Scientology point of view. Outside of Scientology, yes, you want to make amends. That is a total thing that's not created by L. Ron Hubbard or Scientology, but the wording that he chooses is very much Scientology in that way. Let's see. Neptune Art says, Neil reminds me of Danny Elfman. Mainstream artist stepped in cult of Scientology connections, but denies affiliation. Danny Elfman. Is Danny Elfman related to Jenna Elfman? Neptune? You got to fill me in there. And thank you, Jersey Jen, for the reminder. Everybody hit that like button and please subscribe. Mock, exactly. They don't like giving out the Xenu stuff to just anyone. They don't. Exactly. Van Life SoCal says David Miscavige has been very generous to his mother and sister. Oh, wait. Or are you talking Danny Masterson? I'm not totally sure they're Van Life. Maybe you can tell me. So it's either David Miscavige or Danny Masterson. Generous to his mother and sister. To Neil Gaiman's mother and sister. His dad passed away. I'm not sure if his mom is still alive, but he does have 2 sisters. And as far as I know, they're both very active in Scientology. One of them even made a Scientology video not that long ago. Miscavige? Okay, thank you, Van Life SoCal. Jersey Jan says, I'm glad Gaiman's victims aren't Scientologists so they can come forward with his crimes. Mock, so Scientology admitted there's mental illness technically. Exactly, or at least back then. At least back then. It's all very sus. Rude. Gaiman's family are still in. He can't say much or else he never gets to see his family again. I don't blame him. Oh, that's right. We talked about that. So you put the whole thing together, and I think there are more questions about this. I think it's going to be in the news for a while, and it's something we'll probably continue to talk about. If you see something related to this, you want to get on my radar, you can email me, Natalie at lifeafteraccult.com. And I don't think that Neil Gaiman is going to be able to outrun his Scientology history and connection, nor is he going to be able to outrun these allegations. But from my perspective, being what I do here, which is expose Scientology, my interest in this, what really has me, what I want to bring to the table, and hopefully other people will ask the question, is kind of like what Scientology knew about this. especially when he had been receiving Scientology auditing. And anyone who's been in Scientology knows it's like they are good at interrogating, and being that, I don't know what his wife knew at all either, if she just saw it as cheating. Later on, as life goes on and he's married to Amanda Palmer, there were reports that they had an open marriage. But it's messy. It's messy, y'all. There's so many articles about this giving the gory details. So you can definitely go check that out. Anna says Elfman is Jenna's husband's uncle. Okay, so Bodie Elfman's uncle is Danny Elfman. Ah. Mock, didn't Danny Elfman get Jason Begay into Scientology? Oh, I don't know. That's interesting. Hey, Charlie, out of the shower and boom. Yeah, we're talking about this whole Neil Gaiman mess. And it's messy. James Steele, that I'm aware of, there haven't been any charges brought that I'm aware of. I have not seen this as of, what are we now? Central Time, January 14th, 1:43 p.m. Not that I'm aware of. Not that I've seen in any of the articles that I've read so far about that. Van Life SoCal, he helped Neil's nephew get his Scientology wedding recognized in England. He helped Neil's nephew get his Scientology wedding. Oh, that's right. Because in England, they wouldn't recognize Scientology weddings because Scientology's a cult. Ah, interesting. Yeah, that family has all kinds of ties, but it goes deep. It really does. And you're right, James Steele. Sounds like this has been a long time coming. I do believe that it has. I do believe that it has. And yep, Gaiman definitely met Xenu. He did. And I find it so interesting that in all the things I was digging through in different articles, it really is fairly covered up what Neil Gaiman's true history in Scientology is and was. And I saw articles where it really kind of, I don't know if they realized they were downplaying his parents' involvement in Scientology, or they just didn't understand how big a deal it is that his parents, his dad specifically, I don't know if his mom was or not, was in the Guardian's office, and what his father did for Scientology, including using his own child as an example of, here's what Scientology can look like. We're creating a civilization without war, without insanity. Speak to my child. Well, how's that Scientology working out for you now? Apostate Alex. Hey, Alex. I worked with Neil's nephews at London Org. Neil's sister runs a vitamin company that supplies all the UK orgs with vitamins for the Purif. And yes, Neil's nephew is who got married. Oh, okay. I heard about that because the family had this vitamin company. Didn't the parents start it? The parents started the vitamin company years ago and it took off. And when you're on the purification rundown, that Scientology sauna program to sweat out toxins and drugs, supposedly, allegedly, not what happens at all, based on the book Clear Body, Clear Mind that L. Ron Hubbard wrote. And you take a lot of vitamins. We know you take a lot of niacin, but you do take a lot of vitamins. So that's interesting that they provide all of the vitamins for the purification rundown. Wow. ASIN, exactly. I caught that too. In the article is also a line about what he said. I'm sorry I caused an upset, or something similar. That sounded eerily familiar. I'm told that Scientologists and former Scientologists are the only ones who use that word that way. I wasn't aware of that. I have an upset. I guess it's more like I'm upset. I'm upset that you hit my car. But in Scientology, it's I have an upset, because an upset is something that you can just get rid of with Scientology auditing, I guess. I don't know. But ASIN, yeah, good eye there, good ears. I thought the same thing, the way that that was worded. That's often how you can tell if somebody has a Scientology past. In fact, I've seen interviews with Riley Keough, and there's a few things she said that I'm like, oh yeah, that girl was raised in Scientology. You can tell. I don't know how active she is today, but she definitely speaks like a Scientologist in ways, because a lot of it we just don't know, even when we leave Scientology, that that's not how that word is used. But fortunately, with the help of so many of you, never in Scientology, but all in on ending this cult, we learn. Kraken Studio says, in the real world, we say, I'm sorry, I've upset things. So you don't have an upset. You create an upset, or you are upset. I'm upset that there's no more tickets to this movie, that kind of a thing. Yep. Asen says, yes, usually you are upset. You admit you have emotions, not you have an upset. Yeah, it's very much done that way. A lot of the wording, the way that the language of Scientology is very much geared to create like a disassociation between your feelings, your body, because then it's so easy to give up on it, right? To just, either experience abuse, it's just a body, or if somebody dies, they just drop the body, it minimizes it, it creates a disassociation. That's right, Jersey Jan. Never NSPs unite. I count on you guys. I really do. GeoPlanet Jane says Riley Keough is absolutely opposed to cult of Scientology and Little Davy. I'd like to think so, but I haven't heard her come out and say it. I would like to think so. From what I've seen, there's kind of been evidence on both sides to where I'm honestly not sure. I don't know where the girl's at when in regard to Scientology. I would like to think she's a former Scientologist. I like to refer to her that way, but I really don't know. I don't know if her dad, Danny Keough, is still involved in Scientology. Can only assume so. These multi-generational Scientology families like go deep and go long and go far. It is difficult. I'm thinking of my own family, like that I got out of Scientology with 3 generations of my family is, fairly unheard of. People do it. People do it, but it's not probably the common thing. Apostate Alex says Neil's dad, David, was head of the Guardian's office in the UK for many years and led a lot of fair game against critics back in the day. Exactly. I just read an article going over that and talking about the level of attack that they would take against critics of Scientology. Antics of a Mama Squirrel says, proof Danny Elfman doesn't support Scientology. He went after them for trying to use his music. Oh, that's interesting. Not anymore, I guess. He must have left. I think this is something where there'll continue to be these conversations. This news is going to continue to come out. I'm sure he's going to continue to try and distance himself from Scientology. I don't think Neil Gaiman has done any Scientology since his divorce from Mary Gaiman here in the Twin Cities, which was 2007. I could Google it, but it's like 2007 or so. I left in 2010, and I remember learning about this. At the time, too, Neil Gaiman, even though he was a very successful author, I don't know that he had maybe he had just had a movie coming out. I wouldn't consider him to be as successful back then as he is today, but he was still very successful. Very much so. Hey, Chrissy Akers, aloha to you as well. Thank you for being here. Antics of a Mama Squirrel. His brother joined Scientology. Is that what you're saying? Alex says Fabrizio, Emilio, Leo, and Ale, all Neil's nephews, were on staff at London Org while I was there. Yeah, that family goes deep. It goes deep into Scientology. Yeah. So that's what I got for you on this. This is what I know. I know we're going to continue to talk about it. Feel free to send me anything you see, Natalie at lifeafteraccult.com. Incredibly disturbing. We'll have to see what happens moving forward. I'm doing a members only live stream today at 4 p.m. Central. If you're a member, join us. If you can't join at 4 p.m. Central, I hope you catch it on the replay. If y'all could do me a solid and hit that like button, check your subscribe. And when you hit subscribe, click on it and check your notification bell. You want to click all if you'd like to get notifications for when I go live. I'm going to link some of this down below right after I log off, and then you guys can read those articles and stuff if you want. There are many, 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 many gory details. I did read all of it. I just can't bring No, I can't. So yeah, that's just me protecting me. All right, everybody. I hope you have an amazing cult-free day.